Good evening. I'm Nestor Davidson, Chair of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board, and I would like to welcome you to this meeting of the Board. This is the last meeting in a series of public meetings and hearings to determine lease adjustments for rent-stabilized housing units in New York City with leases commencing on or being renewed on or after October 1st, 2024, and on or before September 30th, 2025. I will now take roll call. Please respond if present. Doug Apple.
Present.
Genesis Aquino.
Present.
Christina DeRose.
Present.
Robert Ehrlich.
Present.
Arpit Gupta.
Present.
Alex Schwartz.
Present.
Christina Smith.
Present.
Adon Soltran.
Present.
Nestor Davidson. I'm present. Let the record show that we have a quorum. Before we proceed to motions, I would like to make a few brief comments. First, I would like to thank the many of our fellow New Yorkers, tenants, owners, advocates, and public officials who have participated in the process of determining rent adjustments for New York's nearly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments. I want to especially recognize everyone who testified to their personal experiences at our 4 public hearings, as well as submitted over 275 written, oral, and video submissions. Second, I would like to thank the staff of the RGB for their exceptional research and analysis, as well as for coordinating our meetings and public hearings. Their professionalism and objectivity are essential to ensuring the board's decisions are fully and accurately informed. And finally, I want to express gratitude to my fellow board members for volunteering their time, their insights, their care, and their dedication to our work together. So I gather there will be a motion from the floor.
Thank you, Nestor. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda for today to consider amending the proposed guidelines range voted for on May 21st, 2024, to now include a 0 to 4.5 adjustment range on a 1-year lease and a 0 to 6.5% adjustment range on a 2-year lease, given the new data and additional testimonial submissions that we've received. I ask that if it is ultimately adopted, that this hearing then be adjourned for a brief hearing to satisfy notice and comment requirements, and then to reconvene this board for a new final hearing vote.
I second.
Do we have any discussion? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No.
Nay.
Abstentions? Abstention. Okay. So let me just record the votes. Give me a moment. Abstention.
Just sort of clarifications
Yes.
he wants to delay.
Yes, amend the initial vote, amend the initial guidelines, and then take another hearing on that.
Have another hearing.
Yeah. So are people for no?
No. I vote no also.
Okay. And I assume no for both of them? Okay.
No.
With that, let me turn to our hotel order. Since board members only submitted 1 proposal prior to this meeting, we will now consider Proposal 1 for Hotel Order Number 54. I move to adopt the final language of Proposal 1 for Hotel Order Number 54. This proposal was circulated to the members of the board and posted on the RGB website on June 13th, 2024. And I further move to adopt the explanatory statement and findings for Hotel Order Number 54, substantially in the form submitted by staff to the board as of June 14th, 2024, and to be modified by the RGB staff after this meeting to reflect the adopted rental adjustments. A summary of Hotel Proposal 1 is as follows. 1, residential Class A apartment hotels, 0%. 2, lodging houses, 0%. 3, rooming houses, Class B buildings containing less than 30 units, 0%. 4, Class B hotels, 0%. 5, single-room occupancy buildings, MDL Section 248, SROs, 0%. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Alex. Do we have any comments on this motion? Let me call the vote. Doug?
Yes.
Hennessy's?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Rob?
No.
Arpit?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
Christina?
No.
Adon?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes 7-2. We will now consider proposals for apartment and loft order number 56. We have long alternated each year between tenant and owner members leading our motions. Last year, owner members went first, so this year, tenant members will get the first opportunity to present a proposal to be considered for final adoption. If that motion does not pass, I will recognize our owner members to present a motion. Adon and Hennessy's.
Thank you, Nestor. Good evening. Before the public members vote to increase your rent to something untenable for a third consecutive year, I'd like to take the time tonight to talk less about the data and more about process. You all may recall that during the preliminary vote this year, Hennessy's and I walked off in protest when it became abundantly clear that this board was prepared to ignore or at best discount data on tenant suffering and affordability in favor of adopting a rental adjustment range that would benefit owners at tenants' expense and further enacting harm. Since that vote, I've thought a lot about the Rent Guidelines Board, its processes, its construction, and unsurprisingly, what I'm about to tell you is that it must change, and it must change soon. The old adage that one must understand the history in order to move forward is instructive here. If you do a quick Google search for 1989 Rent Guidelines Board, you'll see that the two tenant reps at that time, Harriet Cohen and Stephen Dobkin, walked out of the final vote that year and resigned on the spot in protest, since the RGB is, quote, a charade since they know what they're going to do, end quote. In '92, Galen Kirkland and Oda Friedheim, the tenant reps at that time, resigned because, quote, it became apparent we were not making progress toward establishing fair rents, end quote. In a New York Times article from 1995, in their summary of the RGB's work, it stated in no uncertain terms that, quote, tenants and landlords loudly plead their cases before the 9-member Rent Guidelines Board, which then adopts rent increases loosely based on the last year's changes in landlords' operating costs, end quote. For the sake of everyone's time, I'll stop there, but you get the picture. You wonder why thousands of people lack faith in this board and this process when nearly every year, despite the data on the affordability crisis and the well-documented exploitation and abuse of our housing system and tenants by landlords and greedy corporations for the last 50 years, the board continues to make decisions to plunge working class, low income, and black and brown New Yorkers further into crisis and despair. My message to all of you then is first, that we need to mobilize and change this process. A system that allows a 9-member board appointed solely by the mayor, comprised of only one current rent-stabilized tenant, no working-class folk, and a handful of people of color is not reflective of those who will be affected by these important decisions. Secondly, there needs to be a change in how the preliminary vote and public hearing processes play out. I, for one, understand that administrative law requires an opportunity for notice and comment, and that the public hearings are important because it's an opportunity for the public to comment on the preliminary vote ranges. The way things are currently done, however, the public is only given input once the range is already set. However, the public and even some board members believe that the public testimony is part of the consideration of affordability that goes into their ultimate decision-making. So why then do we have the public hearings after the preliminary vote when the range is already set and not before, with an additional opportunity to be heard once the range is set to satisfy administrative law requirements? The number of tenants who did not realize that they were testifying after you had all determined that the floor this year for the adjustment was 2% was notable. Now let's turn to the hearings themselves. During the public hearings, I don't draw, I don't take naps, I don't play on my phone, I listen to every single person and I feel the pain and anger when you testify. I listened to the woman who came last year with an eviction notice, who testified again this year that she had to decide between therapy for her daughter or paying the rent when her child is having suicidal ideations because of the stress she sees her mother experiencing about their housing instability. I listened to the countless seniors suffering through deplorable housing conditions, the rats, the leaks, the lack of garbage cans, the mold, the MTA and transit workers that talk about working overtime and not being able to make ends meet or retire comfortably. I listened to the teenage children of color advocating on behalf of their parents, their families, their neighbors, their communities. I listened to the mothers bringing their children, yes, their children, late on school nights to try and get you to empathize and to convince you all that they are worthy of a decision that will prevent utter devastation for their families. Can anyone on this board even imagine what it's like to bring a child, a literal child, to these hearings to try and appeal to your morality and humanity? It's heartbreaking, it's infuriating, it's disgusting. This board asks you to come from all over the city and speak up to be heard, and each year you pour your hearts out, reliving your trauma, and in some cases begging, literally begging, for relief, a lifeline, something, anything. It's horrible. These hearings are a catch-22. If you don't participate, then, well, we provided an opportunity of notice and comment, and they chose not to comment. While all of that is true, what I'm about to tell you may seem counterintuitive, but hear me out. Until this body is reformed and there are people on this board that are willing to adequately consider the suffering you are experiencing in their decision-making, you need to keep coming and testifying. Why? Not for the reasons you think. Do not come thinking you will change their minds. You likely will not. Come because we need to keep building a record of these abuses and these struggles, and most importantly, to galvanize members of the tenant community and get them involved in the housing justice movement. As one person testified at the Brooklyn hearing, after he, quote, turned his back on the board, just as the board has turned its back on tenants, end quote. He said, quote, we do not need to talk to them. We need to talk to our neighbors, end quote. Or maybe we should take a note from Amy from BHIP. She said that many people, quote, after 50 years still do not know this process exists and it is for them, end quote. She highlighted that the board and the city do not highlight the process, its consequences, that there is insufficient public education or announcements throughout the year about decision-making processes that will affect so many so drastically. That is why we must educate our communities, support local organizing groups and housing rights advocates so that the masses can demand the changes they so desperately need. My last suggestion this evening is that the current composition of the board needs to change. The public members tasked with voting on rental adjustments as members of the public have failed you. Again, they lack the courage to depart from moderation and centrism, or in some cases even conservatism, to do what's right. We expect this from our counterparts on the landlord side, but to vote in block based off of the same flawed rationale is a disservice to your post as public members. For those of you who truly believe that you're justified in your decision-making year in and year out without fail, to put increases on the backs of tenants when there has been well-documented rampant deregulation and abuse over the last 30 years, when landlords have been overcompensated at least 13.5% over that same time in unjustifiable rent increases, when we know that a 2.75 increase is not enough to do the maintenance repairs that you so desperately claim as part of your rationale for the rent increase in the first place, you're directly failing the public. That same 2.75% that you're so sure about, that you are not paying, will put more people that don't look like you, that are not socioeconomically similarly situated as you, on the street. Given the data, both current and historical, and the countless people, at least 25 electeds, thousands of tenants, numerous advocates, concerned neighbors, hell, even the mayor this morning calling for a freeze to vote for the increases you are going to vote for is unacceptable. For those of you who keep approaching this problem in the exact same way each year without suggestion or examining or interrogating your biases and lacking the courage or creativity when looking at these issues, regardless if you met your 2, 3, 4-year terms or if you've been on this board longer than that, respectfully, you should step down. You know that tenants can't bear more of this, yet some of you throw your arms up and say, oh well, the quality of the stock is what drives my decision. Again, the distress we're seeing is around historical average. The increases you will soon enact on millions of people are not enough to address the underlying issues. We have no mechanism for tracking whether landlords actually use upward rental adjustments on maintenance rather than using it as profit or debt for debt service. And the thinking that if we don't keep increasing rents this way will necessitate a double-digit increase in the future is both speculative and ignores the reality that the majority of rent-stabilized tenants need affordable homes now. If you keep approaching this problem in the same dogmatic way, rent-stabilized tenants, the majority of which are black and brown, low-income, and working-class folk, will not be able to stay in their homes. This is indisputable. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It doesn't matter if your intent is not malicious. It doesn't matter if you think you're being fair. If somehow you're balancing the equities by splitting the baby, as they say, your actions are directly harming millions of humans with lives, families, and loved ones. We need to make legislative reform of this body and process a priority, and it has become abundantly clear that this is the only way to protect New Yorkers from the politics of this board and big real estate. We need to call on our city and state elected officials to rally behind RGB reform now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, now. We need to reduce the size of this board by removing 2 spots for public members. We need to add city council oversight as a form of checks and balances to ensure fairness when members are added or removed from the board. We need to create mechanisms that require disclosure of actual expenditure data by landlords, or corrections of violations prior to landlords even being able to apply to receive a rent increase from this board. If we don't mobilize and educate the millions of people that are affected throughout the year, not just March through June, and if we don't prioritize these reforms, 2025 will be upon us, and we'll be still looking back at 89, 1992, 95, and 2024 without learning from the abuses we continue to endure. Thank you. Number 9.
Okay. I move to adopt the final language of Proposal 9, Apartment and Loft Order Number 56, that was circulated to the members of the board and posted to the RGB website on June 13. And I further move to adopt the explanatory statement and findings for Apartments and Loft Order Number 56, substantially in the form submitted by the staff to the board as of June 14, 2024, and to be modified by the RGB staff after this meeting to reflect the adopted rental adjustments. A summary of Proposal 9 as follows. Apartments, 1-year lease, 0% increase. Apartments, 2-year lease, 0% increase. We know we need rent rollbacks, but a rent freeze is the least that we can do. So that's why we're proposing 0 increases. For Loft, 1-year increase period, 0%. 2-year increase period, 0%. Special guideline and decontrol units, 27% above the maximum base rent.
Do I have a second? Thank you. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, we will now vote. Doug Apple,
No.
Genesis Aquino,
Yes.
Christina DeRose,
No.
Robert Ehrlich,
No.
Arpit Gupta,
No.
Alex Schwartz,
No.
Christina Smith,
No.
Adon Soltran,
Yes.
and Nestor Davidson, Chair. I vote no. Do the owners have a motion?
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Robert.
First of all, we want to thank the staff, Andrew, Brian, Danielle, and Charmaine, who make our collective jobs easier. Before we make our proposal, we have a few comments about the process that has led us to this final vote. Over the past 2 years, we have watched as duly appointed volunteer members of this board have been subject to harassment, threats, intimidation, and inappropriate political pressure. This has not come from just New York residents. It has also come from city council members and state legislators. Their rhetoric and actions have directly and indirectly encouraged members of the public to also engage in unacceptable and reprehensible behavior. Last year and this year, it is our belief that this board is not reaching conclusions based on an honest assessment of the data. Instead, the decision is based on fear that has been caused by physical intimidation and personal attacks on members. In short, the whole process has been compromised, and the integrity of this board's actions should be called into question. Turning to our proposal, throughout this process, we have clearly outlined the systemic defunding of older rent-stabilized buildings. Let us be clear, rent-stabilized buildings are in severe financial distress. That was the message from analyzing the data from this board, which showed a 19% decline in net operating income for older rent-stabilized buildings in the Bronx. That was the message from Community Preservation Corporation, which provides financing support to affordable housing providers in the city.
That is the message we are consistently seeing, bank failures directly tied to the insufficient rent adjustments that have been advanced by this board for the past decade. That data shows that buildings in the Bronx, Queens, and many parts of Brooklyn and Manhattan have been defunded to the point that it's no longer sustainable. Property taxes continue to increase, insurance costs are skyrocketing, utilities are going up double digits, water and sewer costs are going up 8.5%. This board should be mitigating the long-term damage that has already been done to the quality of affordable rent-stabilized housing. Advancing a rent adjustment in line with inflation is the bare minimum. The reality is that a rent increase that accounts for the past decade of below-inflation adjustments is what is necessary to save the majority of affordable rent-stabilized buildings from deteriorating. Rent-stabilized building owners have been tasked with housing 1 million plus New Yorkers. This board will not recognize the actual costs in doing so, and it's a reprehensible process, one that we as the owner reps cannot countenance, and we have to continue to speak for the industry. Our job is to propose a fair rent adjustment that keeps up with costs. I move to adopt the final language of Proposal 4 of the Apartment and Loft Order 56 that was circulated to the members of the board and posted on the website on June 13th. And I further move to adopt the explanatory statement and findings for Apartment and Loft Order 56 substantially in the form submitted by the staff on June 14, 24, and to be modified by RGB staff after this meeting to reflect the adopted rental adjustments. A summary of Proposal 4 is as follows. 1-year lease, 4.5%. 2-year lease, 6.5%. Lofts, 1-year increase, 4.5%. 2-year increase, 6.5%. And the special guideline and decontrolled units, 27% above the maximum base rent.
Thank you. Second? Second. Any discussion? We will now take a vote on the... Yes, he did. We will now take a vote on this motion. Doug Apple?
No.
Hennesis Aquino?
No.
Christina DeRose?
No.
Robert Ehrlich?
Yes.
Arpit Gupta?
No.
Alex Schwartz?
No.
Christina Smith?
Yes.
Adon Soltren?
No.
And Nestor Davidson, Chair, votes no. The motion fails by a vote of 7-2. I move to adopt the final language of Proposal 30 of Apartment and Loft Order Number 56 that was circulated to the members of the board and posted on the RGB website on June 13th, 2024. And I further move to adopt the explanatory statement and findings for Apartment and Loft Order Number 56 substantially in the form submitted by staff to the board as of June 14th, 2024, and to be modified by the RGB staff after this meeting to reflect the adopted rental adjustments. A summary of Proposal 30 is as follows. For apartments, 1-year lease, 2.75%. 2-year lease, 5.25%. For lofts, 1-year increase, 2.75, and a 2-year increase period of 5.25%. And a special guideline in decontrolled units, 49% above the maximum base rent. Do I have a second?
Second.
Christina, thank you. Any discussion? I will now take the vote. Doug Apple,
Yes.
Hennesis Aquino,
No, not voting for increases.
Christina DeRose,
Yes.
Robert Ehrlich,
No.
Arpit Gupta,
Yes.
Alex Schwartz,
Yes.
Christina Smith,
No.
Adon Sofren,
No.
and Nestor Davidson, Chair. The motion passes 7-2. Before we close, please note that I have drafted.
It passed 5-4.
Oh, sorry. 5-4, yes.
Sorry, the motion passed 5-4. Excuse me. Thank you, Andrew. Before we close, please note that I have drafted a statement on why I believe that this proposal reasonably and fairly reconciles the deep affordability challenges facing tenants in New York City while attending to the reality of rising costs and financing challenges facing the stock of rent-stabilized housing. This statement will be available at the conclusion of this meeting, and I would instruct the RGB staff to include the statement as part of the record and transcript of this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
The meeting is adjourned.